Welcome back on board the Starship, and we are joined by the Starship pet, Ulysses. Now, it's time for the interesting person of the week. And this week it's Sam Wright, who runs the Probe UFO conference in Lytham St Anne's next to Blackpool. And he's speaking here about two stories told by previous speakers at the conference.
A chap named Al Fassbender, who was a captain in Vietnam. And he tells the story of the last days of the war when a general came in and he said, right, we've got to go behind the lines to pick 5 soldiers up. And he had 2 heavily armed guards with him. And he thought, this is a bit queer, a general going behind the lines just to pick 5 soldiers up. Anyway, he didn't argue with them. And they went behind the lines. They landed at this place about 200 yards from the actual jungle itself. And they seen these soldiers. They were in disguise sort of thing, they're all black, and he called them over, you know, and they came walking towards him. They got within about 10 yards and he said to these 2 guards, fire, and they shot them dead. He said, I went berserk, why did you shoot these soldiers dead? He said, there's a reason. So he said to the guards, turn them on the back and wash the faces. So he turned them on the back and they washed the faces, and he called them over. He said, look, they were clones. He said they had 20 clones in Vietnam in the last few weeks of the war, and they went in groups of 5, and the first 15 had been killed within a few days, and these 5 were the only survivors. And he said they couldn't take them back because they have the implants in the head, and all as they taught is to kill. They killed men, women and children, animals. That's all they did. So they actually killed them there and buried them, you know. That was another fascinating story.
And if you think that you might be interesting or have interesting tendencies, then we'd like to hear from you. So if you can make a YouTube clip of you being interesting and then send me a link to starship@richplanet.net. You can talk about anything you like as long as it's interesting. And that brings me to this week's interesting scientific fact of the week. And that is, we mentioned it earlier, that more people are killed annually by donkeys than are killed in plane crashes. Okay, well, thank you very much, Ulysses. We'll put you back in your cosmic hutch. Right, and back to Mark, where we're gonna change the subject slightly and talk about.
Can I have a carrot?
talk about the banking system, because you worked for a bank for many years, didn't you, Mark? And then you became slightly disillusioned over time as to the rules, and basically the entire system was brought into question.
Yeah.
So tell me why and when you began to sort of question the ethos of the banking system.
In the early days, really, when I was a newcomer in the industry, I went in straight from school. And started studying for associateship with the Chartered Building Societies Institute. So just exams after exams, really, postgraduate degrees or whatever level it is. And within that, it's actually hard to explain because it wasn't a great moment. It wasn't a great event. It wasn't a blinding flash. It was just this feeling that all was not right. And when you ask questions about the issuance of the currency itself, there was a big black wall, you know, bang.
You would ask people, so where does new money come from?
Where does it come from?
Yeah.
You know,
and
what gives
what
gives the bank, whatever that means, the right to issue this? You know, because actually we could issue our own, and none of these banks are needed, other than as functional systems where you can pay your money in and use, you know, but even then they're not needed. We could design our own. So having begged that question, I realised there was no official answer. So I pursued that a bit further.
Because a lot of the people within the banking world actually operate in this box, which they follow their own rules and they don't actually know where new money comes from.
No. The first rule of the Financial Services Authority in the UK is nobody that has a license to work within the financial field can actually undermine the system itself, the economic system. If you're seen to be criticising it, pointing out that the Financial Services Authority is corrupt, or at least ineffective, pointing out that the central bank is the biggest scam in history. The second you start touching on this, the Financial Services Authority can just pull your license, or harass you, or do whatever they want to do. So that they're protecting these secrets. But they're not great secrets, because they're actually glaringly obvious to anyone who stops to think about it. But as soon as banks and money are mentioned, people do switch off. They're taught to.
And just to summarise, basically, the Bank of England loans money to our government at interest, and really you could completely change that system, give the government control over its own currency. It can issue its own currency, write off its debt completely. Therefore, the interest that we pay in our income tax, which is interest on government debt, which is 1/3 of all income tax paid is government, goes on interest on government debt. You could write that off, get rid of that straight away tomorrow.
Entirely, yeah. There's a very plausible case to prove that, in fact, all tax in the UK is used to pay interest on the loans. But that's a debatable point. The point is that it's a huge chunk. So simply by removing them from the equation, you could overnight reduce income tax by at least 30%. And this is in these times of recession as well. The reason that's not happening is because the, let's just say, elite people in control of this want to scam you. This is why they're so rich.
Yeah, the central banks have been cajoled into the hands of private individuals who then loan money to governments and therefore pull the strings of governments. I mean, to me, it's bloody obvious, this whole financial scandal, and why this recession has probably been orchestrated.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll put to you a financial system that I think is possibly plausible. The first is that you get rid of the central bank and governments issue their own currency. You then get rid of interest rates. Now, people would say, no, you've got to have interest rates. But if you get rid of interest rates, you then get rid of inflation, and therefore you don't actually need a bank to put your money in, because its value will never reduce. Right. So, you know, essentially, interest rates is people making money out of money, which is essentially immoral because they've not created anything tangible or of worth.
That's right. Inflation only happens because that money was loaned to the government in the first place. That's all that causes inflation. So you'll have an economist coming up with all different theories and words to explain it, but that's all it comes to.
And essentially, it's interest rates and loaning of money which creates these oscillations in the economy, when in essence you could smooth those waters by getting rid of interest completely and having money loaned via the government.
Yeah. I mean, if anyone wants to look at my website, which is just myname.co.uk, we have a campaign that we have websites around the world, End the Bank of England in the UK, End the Fed in America, and promoting the mathematically perfected economy, which actually proves mathematically how to sustain an economy. One can still charge interest within it, but obviously it's at a much lower rate. Ultimately, though, the secret, in my opinion, is to remove interest altogether.
Yeah.
But the mathematically perfected economy actually has been driven at the American government for 30 years. They know this is the answer.
So you would have a system whereby you need, say, £100,000 to buy a house. You go to the government sends someone out, or an agent of some kind. They then set up that loan. They think, yeah, you can pay so much a week for 10 years. They give you that loan at no interest, because we own the currency. Our government owns the currency. That is then paid back. If you default on that, then you would then have a marker put against your name that you can't loan any more money. And that would mean that none of the interest that people make money from would be going into the hands of people who don't actually do any work, i.e. bankers, because they don't create any wealth. So by getting rid of interest, you get rid of making money from money and out of money.
And therefore wealth happens within the community as a natural...
You can still have shares in companies in a capitalist-driven economy, but you get rid of interest, therefore you wipe out the entire group of leeches that live off the rest of us.
It is all very simple. You'll have socialists and conservatives and all sorts of political types confusing the issue with their economic theories, all of which ultimately are rubbish. Because if anyone hasn't seen through the political scam nowadays, they're all controlled by the same organisations, both Tories and Labour. out there at the minute giving their policies for the next general election, and yet all of those policies, or most of them, were written by the same organisation for both parties,
Yes.
by Demos. It's all a scam.
And they like to use the high street banks as sort of whipping boys for their, oh, look at the bonuses that they're giving each other. But they never go near the central bank, do they? Mark?
No. And the public are up in arms about what the bankers have done, but bankers to the British public means Barclays and Lloyds and all of these others, and that's all it means, not the central bank. The issue has been, once again, deflected onto a few greedy bankers who, yes, were way out of order, but they're taking the flak. They're the ones who, well, literally are taking the flak for the collapse of the economy. And it wasn't them, it lays beyond them.
And just to go over to the United States for a moment, this is what President Kennedy wanted to do, wasn't it, before he was assassinated?
Well,
he wanted to
right,
get rid of the Federal Reserve.
This is why
because he saw then in the 60s that it was a con.
Yeah, this is why none of the politicians in this country will actually back, even if they wanted to, they can't back getting rid of the Bank of England, because they will be either assassinated, or they'll have a car crash, or whatever, or they'll just lose their career. They will be pressured, if not killed.
Yeah.
Therefore, that's why I've said it's down to the people to do this. And that sort of ties in with the Hermetic Code that we talked about earlier, because that secret, which has come right through the time since the church was established and so on, also provides the answer insofar as you have an occult, esoteric order running the world, or let's just say directing the world, in a very simple fashion. According to this Hermetic law that I touched on before. And therefore, by definition, because that is occult and it is it's a spiritual knowledge that they're working with against us, we can turn that. It's one of the principles of the occult, is that they can't defend against their own system. So all we've got to do is wise up to how they're doing it, and use it against them. So I have put forward proposals as to how the people in this country can do that. And I'm utterly convinced it can't actually fail. We don't have to do much.
And you've got details of that on your website, yeah?
Yeah, I've written about it. It's a formative idea. It's not for me to say this is exactly what we should do, but people are coming in with their ideas now.
And just to go back to the Bank of England, because we think that's probably one of the key things that needs to be gained control of. The people, in the form of our own government, a government of the people, needs to take control of its own currency, which it currently doesn't have. So who owns the Bank of England? Because this is a question that some people just say, well, it's the government. Is it the government?
Okay, it's dead simple. Talk about the Fed in America as a private institution, all right? Talk about the Bank of England in the UK, and it's a nationalised institution. But there is a twist there, and this is where people get thrown. It was nationalised in 1946, but it has shareholders. So if you can show me any nationalised industry that actually has private shareholders, the identity of which is kept secret by statute.
Yeah, because it's a royal charter or something it's created under.
Yeah, so what you have is a confusing legal mess, really, and the whole thing is a front. The accounts, for example, show that profits are paid to the Treasury, but it doesn't quite work that way. If you read the small print, it's all very confusing, but the official answer is it's nationalised. It is therefore theoretically owned by the British public, but it is not, and that much is provable.
I mean, this is what I find about other aspects of the financial world, that it's made deliberately confusing, and you get these financial experts saying, oh, it's not as simple as that, it's far more complicated than that. And this is one of the reasons why it's made complicated, so that you can't see through this bloody scam.
Exactly. I've never met a financial expert who could, seems to have the ability to sum things up in plain, simple language. They go way beyond that. But anything that they tell you, as supposed financial experts, actually is classroom level stuff. They just make it sound complex because that's what they're paid to do. Makes them feel important.
And one of the things that we saw fairly recently was quantitative easing, where the central bank creates a whole load of money from nothing, effectively. Tell us about that, Mark, because I'm sure you can...
Well, the collapse, the banks collapsed, so the excuse was that the people, the taxpayer, has to bail them out, which is nonsense, because we didn't have to do that. We could have let them go under, because we didn't need them in the first place anyway. But you were told there'd be a complete economic global collapse if we didn't do it. Utter lie. And I say that to the Prime Minister. He is lying. He's bold-faced lie. Because what he could have done was raise that money and paid off every debt in the UK for the people, which would have quantitatively eased the situation. But no, what they did was borrowed money from the bankers, hundreds of billions, and then gave it back to them.
Yeah.
So that you and I and our children and grandchildren have to pay that back. It's the ultimate scam,
And
the
it
ultimate crime.
devalues everybody's money by the fact that there's more money in the system.
It will go pop. And everyone's trying to guess when. No one can say when because there are so many factors. But what one can say with certainty is that we're destined for hyperinflation and the collapse of the pound and the dollar. But that is all planned because they will then suck us into a European or global currency.
A European or global currency, and you think that's possibly what's on the agenda?
I know it is.
Okay, then, Mark.
If you haven't noticed, it's out there, and that's what they're forcing us to do.
Well, thanks indeed very much
My
for coming,
pleasure.
Mark.
Yeah.
It's been fascinating talking to you. And just to say finally, keep your eyes on the skies and your feet on the ground, and tell all your friends about this show.